Chris, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, Betty, we
can hear you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you everyone for joining us at Castle Think Tank for this discussion today on clothing and fashion. We do apologize for the late start, but we are here now and ready to begin our discussion today. Today, our discussion, as already mentioned, is going to focus on clothing and fashion. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Bernard Wanyama, a member of the think tank, to open up this discussion with a word of prayer.
Thank you, Paul. Let's pray. Dear Lord, we want to thank you for today. We want to thank you for the topic at hand. Thank you for the sector of clothing and textile and fashion. And we pray that as we discuss and as we generate ideas, that something new will start in our minds, will start in our offices, will start in our factories, that we shall be able to respond to the needs of society. We shall be able to take up this opportunity that we have before us, and that we shall create a better, stronger economy, specifically focusing on this sector. We commit the discussion to your hands, and we pray that we shall see great and wonderful outcomes. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Bernard. Just to get us to discuss this, I wanted to highlight a few things before we get into the discussion. We always have poll questions once every about 30 minutes, and we will have 4 poll questions today. When you see the poll question popping up on the screen, kindly participate by responding to that question. We will give it about 1.5 minutes for you to respond to that question. Kindly participate in those poll questions. The hashtags for today's webinar are Castle Webinar and Thrive Clothing. Castle Webinar, Thrive Clothing. Those are the 2 hashtags for the webinar today. And for your interest and for your engagement in the discussion, we do have the Q&A chat room. And in that chat room, you can type your questions or you can make your comments. And the panelists that are attending to this discussion today will be able to attend to your question or to attend to your view and opinion. So kindly give it time, engage with us as we go into this discussion. We are monitoring the Q&A section. Please note that it is Q&A rather than chat. It's 2 chat rooms, but focus on the Q&A chat room. I will request that all the panelists mute your microphones so that we can get into the discussion. In an AFP article published by the New Vision on the 1st of July, 2018, titled A War on Secondhand Clothes, a number of critical issues were pinpointed. These issues were further reinforced by the Daily Monitor on Thursday, June 20th, 2019, in an article by Christine Casemire titled Used Clothes Imports Grow Fivefold. The trade in used clothes is good business for many locals, given its excellent source of economic livelihood for them. East Africa imports around the world's used clothing into an industry that employs 355,000 people who earn over $230 million per year, according to USAID. However, in the process, East Africa is losing out on that much needed revenue if local textile and fashion industries were reinforced and functional. Initially, the East African regional bloc was united in its battle against used clothes until Rwanda in 2016 raised the tariffs on the importation of second-hand clothes. To this, the US retaliated and the East African alliance cracked. And the US is holding up on AGOA until the issues are resolved. Now, because of the high population growth, Uganda's import bill of second-hand clothes has as well increased. For example, from $27 million in 2001 to $137 million in 2016. Nearly 95% also of Uganda's cotton is exported as lint. Now the Chinese companies have flooded our local markets with cheap garments as well. And in many ways, there is a need to resolve the issues around the issues on clothing and fashion. East African countries are also now eyeing each other's markets for the now budding cloth and textile market and fashion industries. So we need to resolve this impasse. And the discussion today is aimed at touching these challenges in the clothing and fashion sector in Uganda. Once again, you are welcome to today's CASO Think Tank webinar. And we will be having today, in no order of preference, 4 discussants, and I will introduce them fully as each and every one of them comes up to discuss. However, today we are joined with Mrs. Jolie Sabune, Mr. Jas Bedi, Ms. Santa Hanzo, and Dr. Edwin Kamala. And it's important to note that we will also have representation from the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Cooperatives of the Republic of Uganda, Mr. Jerome Novassa, the Industrial Officer, as our special guest today. But before we get into that discussion, allow me to welcome Mr. Ernest Katwesije to give some opening remarks. Ernest is a member of the board of the CASO Think Tank. Ernest, over to you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope my voice is loud and clear. I am very glad to be with all of us this morning. I would like to appreciate you for choosing to be part of this webinar, for taking off your Saturday morning to join this very important CASO webinar on clothing and fashion. We will all agree that the COVID-19 assault on us has brought new realities that we never envisaged before. It's brought opportunities and challenges and new ways of thinking and doing things that we've come to refer to as the new normal. This definitely calls for us to pause and rethink many things. And CASO, or the CASO think tank, called the Center for Advanced Strategic Leadership think tank, is a non-profit organization that was established to provide research and consultancy towards approaches for addressing challenges to Africa's advancement. And this was after the realization that we did not have much thinking going into Africa's issues, opportunities, and challenges. Therefore, for us to harness the opportunities we have in order to leapfrog to the middle income status as a country, we must think. And most of the developed countries, their development has been spurred a lot by think tanks that pour hours and hours into developing well thought out proposals and alternative proposals for government. Therefore, as a country, we also need a clear thinking spaces if we are able to grow. And that is the space that CASO hopes to occupy, to provide a platform for us as a country to think, to provide research support, consultancy support, both to Uganda and to Africa as a whole. CASO was launched in October 2019, that's last year, during the International Education and African Futures Conference that was organized in conjunction with the Institute for National Transformation and the Ministry of Education. And we used the imaginal learning model to forecast, to reflect, and to provide suggestions for the future. And CASO has had a number of other activities, a number of other workshops. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic threw the whole world, you would say, in panic mode. In Uganda, we had the lockdown that affected the way the entire country and the world operates. Every sector, you can say, was affected in one way or another. And this calls for us to think afresh in order to deal with the new challenges and issues that this raises. And CASO has risen to this occasion by holding a number of brainstorming workshops to evaluate the challenges at hand, the threats, the opportunities. And the result, we had the initial workshop, and the result of this workshop and research were thinking pieces, which CASO is now presenting to the public through public engagements. And the issues that are generated from these thinking pieces are discussed with the public, industry players, and policy makers. We hope that we shall be able to bring research, the public, and the policy makers together so that we don't just have a talking shop, but we can have ideas that contribute to the marketplace and to the transformation of our nation by harnessing the opportunities. We've had 10 webinars. This is the 10th webinar. And of course, our focus today is on the clothing and fashion industry, which has evolved over time from backcloth to kanzus to gomeses to the necktie. Now we have things like damage coming to the forefront. I mean, today fashion is no longer something scorned on, but it is something that provides opportunities for our economy to grow. And I just remembered my PLE question: who introduced cotton growing in Uganda and when? Sir Hesketh Bell in 1903. So after a century, we are here, and I think it's time for us to reflect on how the clothing industry, how the fashion industry can contribute to the growth of our economy. We want to appreciate all our panelists for accepting to join us. Our special guest, you're very welcome. And on behalf of the CASO board, I would like to welcome all of us to this webinar, and I wish all of us positive deliberations. Thank you for joining us. For God and my country.
Thank you, Mr. Ernest Katwesije, member of the Board of Directors, CASO. And we will dive straight in. Once again, my name is Bukenya Paul Michael. I'll be moderating the discussion today. And to present the CASO think tank position paper that will be discussed today is Mr. Chris Kawesa. And Chris Kawesa is the MD of Doug and Bragan, Uganda Limited. Chris is a practical and experienced entrepreneur, manager, mentor, coach, and trainer with excellent leadership and interpersonal skills. He is a professional electrical and information technology technician with extensive knowledge and experience in contracts management, leadership, hygiene systems, implementation of quality, food safety, environment, health and safety systems based on ISO standards. And Chris has a motto that says, I thrive in and enjoy the challenge of a busy and demanding work environment. Today, he manages Dag and Bragan Uganda Limited, a leading company in providing hygiene, which he founded. And he is the technical and maintenance, and it provides technical and maintenance solutions in Uganda since 2004. Dag and Bragan Limited morphed into Dag and Bragan Industries, which ventured in manufacturing of soaps, sanitizers, organic pesticides, and organic fertilizers. He leads a team, the Uganda, a waste management company affiliated to the Initiates Nigeria, an oil and gas waste and management company. He has interest in other companies like Aurora Quality, Speak and Grant, Sabunta Africa, Institute of Cleaning Services, and he believes his life is a mission to develop young men and women. His mission has led him to pioneer several community transformation projects in Naguru and Magere areas, which resource young men and women with entrepreneurship and financial literacy skills with the aim of being self-sustainable. These initiatives have turned into village savings and loan associations from which members borrow money for their businesses. Welcome with me, Chris, to present his position paper. Chris.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul, our distinguished discussants in your capacities, and all other webinar participants. Good morning, and you're very welcome. My name is Christopher Kawesa, and I'm here today on behalf of the CASO think tank to present a think piece that was compiled from a brainstorming workshop organized by CASO on the 25th of April this year. A multi-sectoral group reviewed the information, making additions and adjustments before the lead writers produced this think piece, which is still a working document. I'll start with a general overview and background of the clothing sector, but also highlight the current trends in Uganda, the impact COVID-19 has had on the sector, and I will close with some recommendations from the think tank. Now, a brief background on the sector and the scope of coverage of this webinar. As we know, clothing is one of man's fundamental needs. The accessibility of this need to people is therefore important for any nation, especially in times of global crises like we are currently in, the COVID-19 pandemic. The disruption of supply chains and the travel restrictions imposed due to the COVID-19 pandemic exposed sector gaps in all countries around the world. Now, for Uganda, with a poorly developed local textile and leather industry, we depend on imported second-hand clothes and footwear, like we all know. Now, during the pandemic, the Ugandan National Bureau of Standards suspended the importation of second-hand clothes and footwear, a ban which was later reversed as government opted for a phased approach to the ban after pressure from the public. Now, importation of second-hand clothes has been blamed for undermining the development of the local clothing sector, and is a very contentious topic. Aside from employing numerous Ugandans, foreign powers like the US have lots of interest in this particular subject. Now, according to a study by USAID, East Africa imports around an eighth of the world's clothing. Another study by the Economic Research Policy Center indicates that the worn textile products and clothing is a major component of Uganda's import textile products, accounting to, right now, it's about 511 billion. That was in 2016. Today, it's up to 329 million US dollars. Now, this reveals the size of the potential domestic market that lies untapped in the textile and apparel market. On the export side, nearly 95% of Uganda's lint is exported, which undermines opportunities for increased earnings from upgrading to the value chain. Now, Uganda must intentionally develop this sector in order to play a role in the global sector and benefit its farmers, industrialists, citizens, and the economy at large. Let's define some terms that will help us go through these sessions. Clothing refers to products made from any of the following raw materials. One is natural fibers, which include cotton, linen, viscose, silk, and wool. Synthetic fibers include polyester and nylon and others. Hides and skins include leather, crocodile skin, fish skin mainly. The commonest of the raw materials is cotton and animal hides and skin here in Uganda. Now, hides and skin are raw materials for leather and are byproducts of the meat industry, and they're derived from either urban or rural slaughterhouses of cattle, sheep, goats, and recently fish and crocodiles. Cotton is a plant and is a raw which has a raw material from which a number of products like lint, seed cake, edible oil, and cotton stalks are derived. Some of the key terms are ginning. Ginning is a process of separating the cotton fibers from the cotton seeds. While spinning is a process of making yarn from the textile fiber. And knitting is a method by which the yarn is manipulated to create a textile or a fabric. Now, this webinar is mainly going to focus on the textile industry today. What are some of the major trends before COVID that we had as a country? First of all, cotton was introduced in Uganda by the British colonial government in 1903 as the first cash crop. And by the end of 1930, the production had reached 60,000 metric tons, and it was a very lucrative business. Now, colonial governments then decided to regulate the sector by passing what they call the Cotton Control Board, rather what they call the Cotton Zone Ordinance, which was managed by the Cotton Control Board. And this ordinance mandated the zoning of 14 cotton growing areas and allotted each a ginnery that maintained a monopoly in the harvest of that zone. Later, the Lean Marketing Board was established, and it held a monopoly also on domestic and international trade of cotton, lint, and seed. Now, the lack of strategy after independence by the leadership then, and further still the expulsion of Asians by Idi Amin in 1972, damaged the cotton growing, the post-harvest, and value chain addition of the whole sector. Government later in 1994 established what we currently call the Cotton Development Organization, and it charged it with overseeing and promoting the cotton sector. Now, the Cotton Development Organization has been very instrumental in developing the sector from the farmer to the spinner. Some of the other trends we've seen are that currently cotton growing is done by about 250,000 household smallholder producers, many of whom lack appropriate farming skills. And it's very evident in the production of the cotton in Uganda because on average, 379 kilos per hectare is produced in Africa. In China, they produce 1,270 kilograms per hectare. In Israel, they produce 1,700 kilograms per hectare. And globally, the average is 589. So it's very evident that our farming practices are not yet to standard in order to give us enough value from our land or from the size of land that we have for the growing of cotton. Another trend is that the subsector employs about 2.5 billion people, directly and indirectly. Now, it's good to note that cotton is normally grown as a land opening crop because it adds nutrients to the soil through its foliage. Farmers prefer to rotate it with other crops, which method contributes to food security, but also reduces the production of cotton. Uganda has 40 ginneries with an installed capacity of 1 million bales as a country. However, only 21 ginneries are operational, with only 245,000 bales produced annually. And of that, 90% of the cotton produced in Uganda is exported at a miserable price of less than $1 per kilo. Spinning or weaving and knitting is done by two major textile mills in Uganda. One is Fine Spinners and the other is Nightingale, which all source their lint locally from the ginners here in Uganda. There's a spinning mill in Lira, which is lying idle at the moment. There are also about 400 other micro, small-scale garment producers who produce promotional wear, bed sheets, curtains, and other things like uniforms. There are also 6 absorbent cotton wool manufacturing firms which produce absorbent cotton wool, the one we use in medical services. They produce it locally, and 90% of it is sold to national medical stores and joint medical stores, but also other private pharmacies and drug shops around the country. The balance, the 10%, is exported in the neighboring countries. There are also 9 processors, seed processors in Uganda who produce edible oil. Now, we have a deficit of about 80,000 metric tons of edible oil in the country. We can only produce 40. Our demand is 120,000 metric tons. The CDO, give it a lot of credit, has done a lot to support farmers and also to monitor the production, processing, and marketing of cotton in Uganda, and generally to facilitate the development of the cotton industry. Now, here is one of the major trends. The largest population in Uganda depends on second-hand clothes from USA and other developed countries like we have seen. According to the African Growth and Opportunities Act, in 2017 alone, Uganda imported second-hand clothes worth $1,136,000 US dollars. In 2015, Uganda was in the top 10 importers of second-hand clothes in the world and the top in Africa. In the world, were in the top 10, but were number 1 in Africa, which accounted for 81% of all clothing purchases in Uganda. How has COVID impacted us? What are some of the gaps and challenges exposed by the pandemic? Textiles and apparels being one of the major imports from China into Uganda and other countries, we've suffered, the importation suffered a lot during the peak of the pandemic. Factory closures in China, border closures all over the world resulted in supply chain disruptions. The pandemic also disrupted foreign markets for our cotton and clothes which were being made here by companies like Fine Spinners and others. That market was also disrupted. So the exportation of 90% of our cotton without adding value is a risk to this country. The need for masks, protective equipment during this pandemic exposed the over-dependency of imports and the lack of focus and capacity to manufacture for the local market. Although the impact of factory closures in manufacturing hubs might not have an immediate effect, we might not see the effect now because people are still dressed up, the continuous restrictions in movement or future lockdowns could leave us naked and dependent. One major risk Uganda exposes itself to, being one of the largest importers of second-hand clothes, is the importation of the COVID-19 virus through contaminated second-hand clothes from the USA and other major hubs that have recorded high numbers of COVID-19 infections. So generally speaking, the pandemic has provided the perfect opportunity to reflect on and refocus on building the local textile manufacturing industries. The think tank came up with some recommendations, which I'm going to list now. But before that, I want to give credit to the National Development Plan and also the textile policy for some of the recommendations that they've put forward, which will catapult this sector. And these include, in no other order of importance, increased cotton production and productivity has been highlighted by government, revising mechanisms for importation of worn and clothing products, investing in the textile spinning to increase capacity of the spindles in the country, improving local business environment, strengthening textile subsector support institutions like the Textile Development Agency, Uganda Export Promotions Board, Cotton Development Organization, the Bureau of Standards, and others. To enhance human resource development, also to support the regional cotton textile subsector development strategy as a COMESA block. Government has decided to support as a block to support the policies as a COMESA block in order to catapult the industry. Also strengthen domestic market development, and this has been implemented with policies like Bubu and the rest. Now, all this is a move in the right direction, and we thank government for that. However, to ensure that our country keeps on track to developing the clothing sector, CASO has some recommendations. The first one is leadership in implementation of these plans. As much as the NDP3, National Textile Policy, and other policies have well thought through strategies, one of the leading causes of failure for such strategies is lack of proper leadership in implementing these plans. For example, NDP2 midterm review showed that the annual budget did not fully align with the NDP2 priorities, and it had not been translated into sector-specific interventions to deliver the NDP2 targets. According to the 2019 National Planning Authority assessment, the national budget was 60% aligned to the NDP, so 40% was not aligned at all. Now, poor planning, budgeting discipline, corruption, weak oversight, weak leadership, and low motivation are some of the identified factors that delay implementation of projects in Uganda. The interference of politics in development projects also impacts on implementation of government plans. Oftentimes, politicians interfere with the technocrats and prevent them from executing their tasks. So I believe one of the major recommendations is to align our leadership as a country. 2, increased cotton production. As indeed highlighted by government, there is need to increase cotton production by the farmers and the need for government to create conducive environment for this growth to happen. Some of the things that could be done include rejuvenating cooperatives, cotton cooperatives in the country, accessibility to farm inputs like fertilizers and others, accessibility to agricultural financing, and many other tools that can be used. Recommendation number 3, expanding the mandate of the Cotton Development Organization. Like you've heard, the CDO has done a lot to develop the sector and used its mandate to promote cotton growing locally and also for export. However, there is need to expand its mandate to cover regulatory, to cover spinning, to cover manufacturing and management of other secondary products in addition, so that the promotion of the cotton export, in addition to promotion of cotton export, but also to enhance the local capacity to manufacture locally. Recommendation number 4, building human resource capacity for the sector. There has to be a concerted long-term effort, and this is long-term, not short-term, to raise human resource for the manufacturing sector. Some things that could be done include incorporating in the education sector specific training for managers and technicians that is suitable for the future of the industry. Another thing that could be done concerning human resource capacity is to equip and expose the current public sector with skills to strategize, plan, implement, and regulate the textile and leather manufacturing sector. This could be part of the major part of the skilling project that's happening now in Uganda, Skilling Uganda projects. Number 5, rejuvenating other raw material subsectors. The other clothing industry, raw materials like silk, nylon, wool, need to be given some attention. Research must be taken and published for investors and linkage created between, for the current value chain between private sector and public sector to enhance these other raw materials. Skilling farmers, technicians, and public sector promoters like Uganda Investment Authority in these raw materials must also be given priorities, because these are people on our forefront dealing with investors and the public, so that they can be aware of these other particular raw materials. Creating a local second-hand clothes source. As the way to import substitute, as we've seen, over $329 million is going out as importation of clothes. Public and private sector should innovate and create a local source of these second-hand clothes as opposed to importation. People in our homes have lots of clothes that they can be used or modified or improved in order to be sold locally as opposed to importing. This will reduce on the value of imports made in clothes. Number 7, enforcing the policies that support the sector. Policies like the ban of the used garments and footwear, boo-boo, textile, hides and skins, and others have been developed to support the sector. So there must be a deliberate effort to enforce these policies in order to realize the intended benefits. Electricity. As we all know, this is a major one across the whole manufacturing sector, but growth in manufacturing depends a lot on the availability of affordable or cheap electricity. Now, Uganda has an oversupply of currently we supply 1,254 megawatts. So increasing generation in isolation has a price, notably a high tariff, because supply must be paid for regardless whether it is used or not. So surplus can actually be expensive. So industrialization right now of the textile sector must take advantage of this surplus in order to reduce on the eventual tariff. Now, some of the things that could be done in the midterm by government to subsidize electricity. Uganda remains the only country in East Africa where electricity is not subsidized. Also, to increase power distribution and transmission in order to reduce on the power tariff. The other recommendation is financing of local investors. The largest part of investment in spinning, tanning, and other technologies, which is very high, is by foreign investors, who in many cases already can access affordable financing from their home countries. Current local financing options come at high cost for Ugandans, which limit our local entrepreneurs' ability to access. Again, in the 2020-2021 budget, the Minister of Finance provided 1,045 billion Uganda shillings for micro, small, and medium enterprises and other manufacturing firms through the Uganda Development Bank. Again, this is a step in the right direction. So we thank government for that. More must be done to deliberately encourage indigenous Ugandans to enter the textile sector. One approach would be to incentivize circles and microfinance institutions to support smaller manufacturers or cottage industries. The revival of cooperatives could also help, could be scaled up to help the manufacturing in this particular sector. Now, what would be the expected benefits from these recommendations? One, with better leadership in implementing national plans, there shall be an increase in cotton production and national textile spinning capacity because the policies and mandates are in place. So better leadership will help us catapult the industry. Two, reduced power tariffs will record high investor ratings and conducive business climate, which will interest textile investors, but also create profitability for the current investors in the industry. Number three, availability of affordable financing will increase capacity for local investors to invest in the textile sector. Four, rejuvenating the raw materials in the industry shall increase in the value chain of the local textile industry and also increase chances to compete globally. Five, creating a local used clothes source shall, one, reduce on the risks of catching COVID-19, if any, in the garments that we're importing, but also increase the GDP per capita because there'll be business locally, second-hand clothes from Uganda sold to people in Uganda. Creating a positive balance of trade will be one of the major things that will happen if these recommendations are taken place, because we will be reducing the import bill on new and used garments. Now, as I conclude, currently, each year, Uganda spends over $329 million on importation of clothing-related material. $329 million on importation of clothing-related material. This figure is a substantial figure. On the other hand, the global business of textiles and leather products is about $1,015 billion. $1,015 billion. Now, with import substitution and also tapping into the global industry, this can create revenue for Uganda, but also create jobs in just one sector, clothing sector. According to the UN report, World Population Prospects 2019, the world population is projected to reach 8.5 billion in 2030, 9.7 billion in 2050, and 11.2 billion in 2100. Now, more than half of the global population between now and 2015 is expected to occur in Africa. Now, this is a very interesting figure because on top of the need to create jobs, there is a market that shall require clothing and related products. So we have a very big opportunity. Finally, developing our clothing sector is an important part of our national security and provides the best opportunity for increased local production of high quality raw materials, naturally given to us by God and freely available in nature. It also provides the opportunity to work with people of Uganda to improve the quality of our raw materials by including them in every step of the value chain. If this is not done, we remain vulnerable to future challenges that global shocks will produce in our increasingly independent world. Uganda needs to buttress high economic emancipation by aggressively invoking both import substitution and export earning growth for balance of payments improvement. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to me. Mr. Moderator, over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chris Kawesa, indeed, for a case well put forward. Uganda must indeed buttress economic foundations, otherwise the future looks rather different and different. All right, proceed now. Just to remind us a few things, we do have the hashtags for this webinar being Castle Webinar and Thrive Clothing. So please broadcasters far and wide among all your friends and hashtag these hashtags. The panelists, just to remind you, there will be questions and comments coming in the Q&A section. I want to encourage the webinar attendees to put your views and your comments and questions in the Q&A section that is somewhere on your screen, usually at the bottom where all the submenus are. There's 2 chat sections there. Kindly ignore the chat and put your questions and views and opinions on the Q&A sections. We will also have a poll question coming up at least once about every 30 minutes. And the first poll question is coming up shortly. And when you see that poll question, kindly participate. It will be on your screen for about 90 seconds. And the first question is, where do you buy most of your clothing? Where do you buy most of your clothing? Is it second-hand outlets? Is it new clothes shops? Is it seamstresses or tailors? Is it I buy them when I travel abroad? Where do you buy most of your clothing? Is it second-hand outlets? Is it new clothes shops? Is it seamstresses or tailors? Or I buy them when I travel abroad? We are looking forward to your opinion to be given on that question. It matters what your view and your opinion is. Thank you so much. I see the participation coming in. And in about 20 seconds, we will be closing this particular poll. Where do you buy most of your clothing? Is it second-hand outlets, new clothes shops, seamstresses and tailors, or I buy them when I travel abroad? We are now ending this particular poll with close to 80% participation, and 45% of the participants are buying these from second-hand outlets, 29% from new cloth shops, 16% from seamstresses and tailors, and 11% who buy them when they travel abroad. Thank you so much for participating in that poll. And that brings us right next to the first discussant, Mrs. Jolie Sabune. Jolie is the Managing Director of the Cotton Development Organization. And this organization is responsible for regulating, promoting, and coordinating the cotton sector in Uganda. The organization is as well responsible for advising government on relevant policies on the sector. Jolie, we welcome you to give your commentary on this particular thing, please. Jolie, over to you. Jolie, you need to unmute your microphone. Let me see if I can do it here where I am. Kindly unmute Jolie. Oh, we can't hear you still. No, we cannot hear you. Admin team, kindly help us sort Jolie out. I can see you're unmuted, but I cannot hear you. Okay, I think we will park the discussion on Jolie. We will come back to, oh, Jolie, is that you? Oh, we seem to have lost Jolie. Oh, Jolie, can you kindly speak? No, I think the admin team is going to have to get in touch with you. Let us move to the other discussant on the think tank. We will take you next. We will move on to, would have been discussant number 2, Mr. Jas Bedi. Mr. Jas Bedi is the current executive director of Fine Spinners Uganda Limited. He is the chairman Kenya Export Promotion and Branding Agency, and Director of Kenya Private Sector Alliance, and Managing Director of Bedi Investments Limited. Government of Kenya have recognized his business acumen, with His Excellency President Mwai decorating Just with Moran of the Burning Spear Medal in 2012. In 2016, His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta decorated Just with a medal, Elder of the Burning Spear. Just has served as Chairman of African Cotton and Textile Industries Federation, Chairman of Export Promotion Council, President of International Textile Manufacturers Association, Chairman of and Director, Kenya Association of Manufacturers, Chairman, Kenya Apparel Manufacturers Exporters Association, and he has been tirelessly involved in developing export market opportunities, particularly in trading blocs such as the ESC, COMESA, SADC, TAFTA, AFTA, USA, and the EU. Just is a textile graduate, 1984, and has attended numerous executive business courses in Harvard Business School. Kindly welcome Just with me to speak to the subject at hand. Just, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Really appreciate the introduction. But yes, I think it's a very interesting subject that we're discussing this morning. And interesting because this is the only industry that's going to transform Africa. And this is the only industry that's going to make sure that we can industrialize. And if you really rewind everything that has happened so far in the world, industrialization started from a basic industry, and that basic industry has always been the textile industry, whether it was the UK in 1900, or it was in Hong Kong in 1950s, or in Taiwan, in Korea, in China, India, Bangladesh. All these countries, if you look at it, actually developed through a basic textile industry. And I don't think in Africa that we can or we should reinvent the wheel. We should just actually look at the same situation and see what can we do to industrialize the continent. So give you a little bit of statistics on the continent of Africa. Africa produces about 7% of the world's cotton, and largely it's conventional cotton. Maybe we're two countries trying to do trials on BT cotton, which is genetically modified. The rest of the world is largely using genetically modified. So we have a cotton which has a difference. And that 7% equates to 1.5 million tons. The total size of the pie of the cotton world is 26 million tons. And we export 70% of that 1.5 million tons we grow on the continent. A lot of it is actually from the C4 countries in West Africa. But by and large, we do very little value addition. So if you look at those global statistics that I've just shared, and then you bring them down to Africa, we are like 7% of the pie, and then you bring them down to Uganda, you actually see that Uganda exports about $50 million of raw cotton. And if that raw cotton is turned into a simple t-shirt, just a very simple t-shirt like what we are doing in our factory in Kampala, that needle moves from 50 million to 750 million. So there's a serious value addition opportunity in this value chain. So if you start exporting $750 million of textiles just by making a simple t-shirt, it tells you that it's a game changer for a country like Uganda, because your largest export today is coffee, which is at $400 million. And this industry can actually overtake coffee and also create a lot of jobs. And I'll give you a simple example. We employ 1,800 people in our Kampala factory. Prior to coronavirus, we had 1,300 people. We actually increased 500 people extra into our factory purely because of the government commitment to buy locally the face masks, which we started producing. Of course, we were shut for 2 months during the lockdown period, which was a difficult period for us, and we had to repurpose and retool our entire factory and think, what can we do differently? Because most of our customers in Europe and US were having difficulties. A lot of them even went bankrupt and shut shop, and some of them are not going to reopen. I think we all know that JCPenney is struggling with bankruptcy. So is Victoria's Secret. So is Brooks Brothers. So is Top Shop in London. And in our customer base, which was largely in Europe, only one customer continued buying, and we were doing 80% export out of Uganda, and 20% was the local market. But right now, we have overturned the prism, and it's 80% local market and 20% export. So yes, there is a serious market opportunity domestically, which we did not look at initially, but is a territory that we are now going to aggressively pursue. But the only customer that's surviving in Europe for us is a customer who is an online retailer like Amazon. Amazon is the world's largest online retailer. The second largest is Otto Group in Germany, and that's the customer that we are working with. And their orders have gone up, but bricks and mortar stores, anybody who had a physical store, is actually suffering. Some of them have not opened and may not open for the rest of the year. I mean, we got 3 lines from our buyers during the pandemic saying, do not cut, do not make, do not ship. So it just tells you the volatility in exports in a situation like where we are now. So we are very clear that yes, there's a serious opportunity, and I know you touched on Mitumba, and or in Uganda you call it Mivumba, second-hand clothes. Yes, it's a serious threat to the sector, but I think it has got by and large far greater geopolitical attachments, and we saw what happened. But just to give you statistics out of Kenya, which I'm very sure replicate into Uganda, we thought, and we were also put on watch by the US TR when we tried to endorse the East African heads of states submission on second-hand clothes, which was 16th of March 2016, if I'm not wrong. So obviously Rwanda went ahead and pursued the heads of states agreement. Or the rest of the countries had to retreat a little bit, and so did Kenya, purely because we were cautioned that if we pursue, that we will lose our market access to the United States under AGOA. And obviously, for Kenya, we are the largest exporters to the US under AGOA. We have last year we exported $450 million of apparel to the US. And we have over 50,000 jobs in the sector in our EPZ supplying to the US market. So, but if you look at the global dynamics, that's a very small part of the US market. The US imports $100 billion of clothing. Kenya's export is only 0.4%. I mean, it's as large as it is for Africa. It's actually very, very small in the grand scheme of things. And that's when you ask yourself, guys, we have a serious opportunity in the continent of Africa. And really speaking, we're doing nothing about it, and we're not even taking the opportunity, which is laid out across a front of us. And I mean, give you statistics on other countries. If you look at Bangladesh, they export $31 billion of apparel, out of which $6 billion is to the US and the rest is to Europe. And China is number 1 at $33 billion. And if you look at all those global markets and how they are faring out, then yes, they don't have duty-free market access to the US. So surely as the continent of Africa, we should be looking at adding value and looking at the markets that we have at the doorsteps, which is, of course, our own domestic markets and the regional markets that we are opening up. Of course, East African community for the region is big, and with the introduction of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, which has been delayed to 1st January 2021, there are 1.2 billion Africans that can also consume, be it small, but it's a huge opportunity. But just to give you the consumption of the consumption patterns of the textile apparel industry, I know I might run over my time, and if you feel that I've actually gone over and you want to interrupt me, it's fine. But I think it's important that we get to know the statistics that drive this sector. The global statistics are the following: that America consumes 39 kilos per capita consumption. That means every American buys 39 kilos in his wardrobe per annum of all textiles. Europe, they consume about 25 kilos per capita consumption. China consumes at the moment at 16 kilos per capita consumption. India consumes 6 kilos per capita consumption. Africa consumes 2.5, out of which 1 kilo is secondhand and 1.5 kilo is new. So it just tells you that yes, we have a small consumption, but yes, it is a number that that actually reflects on the global scale because of the sheer number of people that we have on the continent. So if you fast forward this, of course, Corona is going to disrupt these numbers that were being shared earlier on prior to Corona, that the world's biggest market is at the moment Europe and US combined, which is $550 billion, and China and India at $220 billion. And fast forward 5 years, I think now it'll probably go to 10 years because of the pandemic. There's been a contraction of the size of the pie. The global textile, apparel, and fashion industry is $2.5 trillion. And because of the pandemic, it has shrunk to $1.5 trillion. We've seen all the bankruptcies with the retailers. And of course, with a shrunk pie, we're going to see a pressure on factories. Factories will shut next. And thereafter, dumping is going to start. And dumping from Asia into Africa will happen. And we need to be very clear that how far do we allow imports into our countries, because when somebody is dumping, is selling below his cost price, and even not allowed under WTO. So as you fast forward this whole thing, China and India will actually overtake Europe and US, because 2.5 billion people consuming, because the indication that we have is that China is going to start consuming 25 kilos per capita consumption, because when you have money, you buy more. Same thing with India. India is going to move from 6 to 16. It was supposed to be in 5 years, but my personal thinking right now, it might extend to 10 years. So by 2030, China and India will be the world's biggest market. So who is going to supply Europe and US? Of course, Africa sits pretty, because Africa is duty-free both to Europe and US. So we have a serious opportunity, not only on the continent, but also supplying Europe and US, and a serious opportunity on value addition and import substitution. We saw what happened during the pandemic when we, as Africa, were trying to buy PPE from India or China or Europe or Turkey. We were told, sorry guys, right now the PPE is only for domestic consumption, and Africa, you guys manage your own issues. Simple what they told us, you die yourself on your own. We forgot about our trade agreements. And so I know there are going to be lots of Q&A, but what did Africa do, and what did Kenya do, and what did other countries do? A lot of them started looking within and said, can we start producing PPEs locally? And we have done so, and we've actually said we don't even want to import. So I think there are opportunities everywhere. And let me stop here because my time is up, and surely I'll be very happy to answer any question that comes up. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you so much, Josh. And indeed, some very enlightening things that have come up in your submission right there. And something that you have mentioned, which we'll come back to later, which I've summarized in a statement: do not fight Mivumba, simply add value, because the battle is not worth it. All right, we seem to have Jolly available to us right now. Jolly, kindly, can you come online and as well make your submission? Kindly unmute as you come online.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Paul, and thank you for the panelists. Thank you for inviting me. I'm so happy that actually my mic refused and just talked before me, because I think between Kawesa and Just, they've done my job. So I'll concentrate more on the production in Uganda and where we are and why we are there, because we, Mr. Kawesa talked about a lot of statistics, which are very good, and I agree to that, but at least we have 28 gineries that are working, and the rest of the things I think were okay. So just having talked about, and I really thank Kaso for doing a very good job. The statistics were very good. They are very accurate, so they've made my work easy. Cotton in Uganda as a fiber and for value addition, I want to say that yes, we've tried our level best. We've done what we could, but as long as we don't have 100% value addition to our cotton, we can talk and talk and talk, but the farmers will not produce that cotton. India, China do what they do because they add value from everything that is called cotton and its byproducts. I would request that I gave a value chain, if you can flash it, so that everybody sees how many industries and cottage industries that were talked about by Chris that are within this sector. It's not only the clothing industry, but there is so much offshoot, and that is how countries like Cambodia, like Sri Lanka, like China, India, what we call the Asias, they actually have those cottage industries. 1 million bales can go to 1.5. We've only managed to put it to 250,000 bales compared to what it was in 1969. What was a figure that was also talked about 500,000 bales, simply because that time, those who were around, some of us, we are not that, we were young, but we tested that. We had so many textile mills that were doing cotton, rayon, nylon, polyesters, viscose. Those who remember a rayon textile mill, ATM, UG was working, Nightil was working, and so many others. So there was, then the marketing was of course controlled, it was under the marketing boards. But fast forward, we can still achieve that. And I think there is a silver lining at the end of every bad cloud. COVID has come in to wake us up. I, for one, has been struck. Unless we add value, we're not going to compete with the world. Come COVID, everybody realized that the whole world could shut down. I believe God wanted to wake us up. And once the whole world is shut, you can't even move, even if you wanted to, or move goods and services. You have to depend on what you have internally. So thank God the masks are being done here and the sanitizers and etc. So what am I saying? Yes, we should do, I like the recommendations that CASO has put out. I think under the NDP3, we participated in everything. Those recommendations are all endorsed by CDO and through me. So if government can actually pick them up and the think tank widens its scope, I think we can achieve much from what we, yes, thank you. That's the value chart. Yeah, that's the value chain. The green part for those who are participating. We have the cotton plant, we have the seed cotton, then we have the seed and the lint, and we also have the other side of cotton stocks. So anybody can have a look at it, and that is how many medium scale, large scale, cottage industries, even backyard, can be done as industries. So the cotton sector, I think, is a crop that has the longest value chain, and it can all be achieved internally if government and all the decision makers put their thought to doing this, and we do this together. And it's all the clothing. Then we talk about clothing, but we forget that there is the other byproduct of seed. I'll just show you, for those who don't know seed. You see, when you do cotton, you also get these two products. You get the seed, which is like this, and you get the cotton. So this seed can also has the yellow part, which at least for now we are doing oil, we are doing animal cake, and we are doing the husk, which can be used for mushroom growing and everything else. Because the 10 minutes is really not so much, we are already, Mr. Kawesi did give how many industries are in oil milling, how many are in soap making, how many are in absorbent wool, how many are adding value vertically, and that is where fine spinners and Southern Range Nyanza belong. So, but all that can only happen and be sustainable if the farmers are growing cotton. Farmers, we have cotton farming or growing in 67 districts of Uganda. We have 28 ginneries that are active, and the 2 spinning mills are only consuming about 5% of what we produce, that is about 200,000 out of 200,000 bales, maybe they consume about 20, 25. So if we can add capacity to the spinning capacity that we have in Uganda, I think Mr. Bedi will bear me witness, by rule of the thumb, it's 1 bale per spindle. For now, we have under 30,000 spindles in the country, between Southern Range and fine spinners. We need an extra about maybe 10 of what we already have. So if we can have 200,000 spindles, that is if all the problems that stop setting up spinning mills are addressed, attract value addition to 200,000 bales. If not 200,000 bales, we can again engage with the already existing spinners, because this is a very heavy capital industry. You need minimum $20 million, maximum you can go up to $40, $60 million, but let's even look at $25 million. So we can engage with the existing spinners and we immediately expand their capacity. Again, we are talking about fashion and clothing. I want to bring it the other way around. We should not look at the fashion. I'm sure I see Santa, she will talk about fashion. Fashion is the high end, but why don't we even look at addressing the basics, the uniforms for schools, the uniforms for hospitals, for our uniformed and disciplined forces, the hotels, the towel material, the blanketing, you know, simple textiling and garmenting. Then we can think about the high end, like Mr. Bedi was talking about, where you go into exporting and into the high end retailers. But for now, I think for us to clothe our people, our schools, our hospitals, and the basic sheet material, you know, a jola, that is what everybody understands. Then for the mixing and the fabrics and the fashion, what the young people want, or everybody that wants to be smarter, that will be the next step, because every step has its own challenges and we need to build capacity, which I had again in the Castle presentation, it was there. The fashion industry is not well developed for capacity-wise. You have to train, you have to put up training institutions. I see Dr. Kamara, I know Sitema is trying, Chambogo is trying, but we need to do a lot. So my advice is always, let's start with what we have, the basics. Let's do plain material, but add value to everything that we are producing. Because once we do that, the price to the farmer, which is the incentive for the productivity, is going to at least stabilize at about 2,000 shillings. Once you stabilize the price of the farmer, that is the biggest incentive to increasing productivity. Not inputs, not fertilizer, not anything. I can assure you, the farmers already know how to do that. You need to stabilize the price. As we talk now, with the whole world shut down and imports not going and textiles not going, the farmer is very anxious. What is going to be the price? Unless the farmer is assured of the price and a good price and a stable price, definitely they are not going to plant your cotton, even if you give them the best fertilizer and the best tractors. Yeah. So I think I will leave it at that, and I'll be available to answer or add on to whatever you want me to add. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. We indeed appreciate the response to the think piece. And just to remind all our panelists that there is some questions and comments already in the Q&A section. If you can go and pick up as appropriate and respond to them. This is now a place where we can have the poll question, the second poll question, before we move into the third panelists and their views on the think piece. Poll question number 3, kindly administration team, let's have it broadcast. In the meantime, part of the commentaries as we await for that poll questions Oh, it's up here. What should we prioritize, or what should be prioritized to meet Uganda's clothing demands for its young, growing population? Should we increase cotton production and productivity of the smallholder, medium, or large cotton farmer? Should we ban mivumba or second-hand clothes? Should we skill textile and fiber? Or should we facilitate the development of alternative fibers? What should be prioritized to meet Uganda's clothing demands for its young, growing population? Is it in increasing cotton production, banning second-hand clothes, skilling in textile and fiber development, or facilitate the development of alternative fibers? Kindly make your view known. I would like to encourage us, each one, to take a go at that question. We are addressing the issue of prioritizing Uganda's clothing demand for the young, growing population. And the options are increase cotton production, ban second-hand clothes, skill in textile and fiber development, or facilitating the development of alternative fibers. We need to hear your view on this poll. Kindly make your views known. We should be closing the poll in the next 15 seconds. And thank you very much for those of you who have participated in that poll. So we should be ending the poll right about now. Thank you very much for those of you who have participated. And an overwhelming 50% says that skilling in textile and fiber development through curriculum from primary school level is what needs to be done, followed by increasing cotton production, and followed by development of alternative fibers, and lastly, banning of second-hand clothes. So clearly, the issue is not so much around banning the second-hand clothes, according to our webinar attendees. Thank you so much for making your view known in this particular poll. We will be moving on to the third panelist. And it's just great that Santa, in Jole's last commentaries, your name came up. So Santa is our next panelist. I will introduce Santa and give us a profile of who she is. Santa Hanzo is the Chief Fashion Designer and MD of Arapapa by Santa Hanzo. She is the founder and president of Uganda International Fashion Week 2003 to date, and is celebrated for building a 19-year-old respectable national brand in uncharted waters. Arapapa by Santa Hanzo has grown to become internationally recognized fashion brand, and Santa has won a couple of awards. First and foremost, she has won the first prize, Presidential Transformers Appreciation Award, and was recognized by His Excellency President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni for leading, promoting, and developing the fashion industry in Uganda. She was also awarded the Pioneer Groundbreaking Award by the Uganda Women Entrepreneurs Association and the International Labour Organization. Santa has also received the Jane Goodall Certificate of Celebration for the tremendous difference she has made. She has also been endorsed by the editor-in-chief of Vogue Italia, Franca Sazzoni, as well as UN Fashion for Development. She has also been recognized by Uganda Registration Services Bureau as a power change woman in innovation and creative industries. She's recognized by the UN-launched Footmarks publication as one of the 87 most influential women in Uganda. She is hosted by Google in celebration of women who inspire. She is also a recipient of AFSA Lifetime Fashion and Icon Achievement Award. Santa, we are clearly waiting to hear from you. Kindly take it away. Over to you, Santa.
Thank you so much, Paul. Indeed, it's a pleasure to join the rest of the stakeholders in addressing the opportunities that the pandemic COVID-19 has, brought forth in 2020. I am most honored to share this webinar with our viewers, and mostly also my colleagues. Jolie, we look forward to interacting a lot with the Cotton Development Organization. The fashion sector is asking for fabric. That is major. And as well, Mr. Jazz Bedi, we're excited to have fine spinners here, because we believe that there are so many linkages that the fashion sector and the manufacturing big guys can, we believe we can have great linkages together. Now, I will start by saying that I believe that fashion or the clothing sector is the answer. It indeed will bring about the much needed swift economic change in Uganda. We are a sector that globally is worth over $3 trillion US. There are changes in my statistics and those of Mr. Bedi's because, the sources are different. Most of our statistics are coming in from the USA. But I will also say that as Uganda, we are the youngest population in the world. 77% of us is youth. And yet 83% of those youth are unemployed. Now, our sector of fashion and clothing has the potential to absorb all the unemployed of Uganda, especially youth and women. Now, it is also a known fact that Africa grows up to 10% of the world's cotton. But it is also known that we benefit almost nothing from the over $3 trillion US, because China takes most of that at 46%. And then, of course, the EU led by, Germany, then in India, Bangladesh, and the rest take over. And yet, even though we grow 10% of the world's cotton, 10 of the largest African farms combined earn only 0.5% of the big bucks that we just quoted above. Now, I want to correct my dear Jolie that fashion is actually very urgent. And fashion is not necessarily only high-end. We can do the masks. As a matter of fact, we've been demanding, we've said to government, give us some masks. We are value addition 100%. We focus on quality. And so the big guys can do the millions, but we as well are able to handle some good, some good numbers. The difference there being that if, I will refer to China, if China is going to charge 2 cents for a mask, or let's say $1 for the mask, we as Ugandan fashion designers will not charge that. We'll probably charge about $5. Why? Because we don't pay our employees 2 cents. We are very sensitive to the communities in which we operate. We believe in sharing the profits and sharing the business because we are passion driven. We are called into this business, and so we stick in day out. We've eaten or not, we stick because this is the call on our lives. Whether we have government support or not, we must stay in business, and we pay our people very well. And so we do the masks. There's also something called pret-a-porter in fashion, which is ready to wear. Now that is affordable. That is what I will say mostly Woolworths and maybe also, Woolworths probably does, is well known for. Arapapa does that as well. We have a segment for ready to wear. But then we also have street fashion, where it is not necessarily mass production. like what fine spinners would do, or Nitel, or China, but it's, the volumes are a lot bigger. But then, of course, what makes us known is the haute couture, which is the high end. That is where we earn from, about $500 to maybe $10,000 for those that have markets in the Americas and the Western world. In Uganda, we definitely cannot charge up to $10,000, but we sure can go up to $1,000. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that fashion is not only about the beautiful clothes, the lights, the paparazzi, the models that we see in the newspapers and on TV. Fashion, just like any other sector, is a multi-billion-dollar industry waiting to be exploited. Fashion, just like communication and tourism, like agriculture and transport, like construction, like petroleum and gas, we are very similar. The structures remain the same. We are considered luxury because of our frontage, which is very important and which the industry in Uganda must adopt. Because I believe we are still struggling because we have not activated the aspect of fashion. We need to activate the aspect of fashion. The president rated the clothing and fashion industry as the second most important survival economy. I will call it a growth economy because much as we've been hit now, believe you me, I agree with Mr. Bedi when he says that when all this is done, we are the sector that will employ our people. We are that sector that will create the wealth that our people need, long sustainable wealth. Now, a lot of challenges, of course, have been brought forth by the COVID-19 pandemic. We have lost out as fashion designers all over the world. Bloomingdale's is shutting down. We have heard about JCPenney's. We have heard about Victoria's Secrets. And of course, yours truly, Arapapa by Santa Hanzo, has had to close our retail store and move online and also to our factory outlet. Mr. Bedi, our factory outlet is not what you're used to. It's a lot smaller, but we are looking to grow to be as, as impactful in terms of the numbers we employ as you. So we're looking to you for inspiration and guidance in that area. Much as our factories and shops have closed, we have also lost a lot of jobs. Lots of millions of jobs have been lost globally. In Uganda, we are hungry. The sector is very hungry because, the business is down. And so we are saying there is need for a stimulus package to be considered for this sector. As we plan the future, there is need for us to navigate the current, ensure that we don't die out. We must ensure that we activate the right strategies to return back to the boom that we had and actually earn a bit of the big bucks. Now, there are some recommendations or solutions that we've come up with and in the fashion sector. And one of those is, number one, facilitate access to patient finance. It's a known fact that the big guys have a lot of support from government, but we do not. And we also need to have this electricity subsidized. We need to educate stakeholders and players in general in the sector. We need to educate them right, skill them. We have to open up the production plants to ensure that we actually have the right world-class seamstresses doing the good job that we need in our factories. We also need to make sure that events such as the Uganda International Fashion Week, which actually develops and promotes locally made fashionable products like clothing, shoes, bags, and all, are supported. when we host events like that, we actually open up the market of Uganda to the world, because then we have this media down here. We have CNN, we have Al Jazeera, we have BBC, all coming down to participate in our Fashion Week. And yet the government is very silent about something like that. And so we believe that for this industry to move forward, first of all, it's important, it is urgent, like the president said, but we also must be taken seriously by policymakers, decision makers. And I will also note that in the think piece that was referred to earlier, fashion was not given the attention it deserves, because I believe that we were not fully consulted or involved in drafting that piece. So with this presentation, my request is that we be given a chance to amend that. Now I've rushed this, but I hope that I've been able to get my, my communication across. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Santa. And just to give you a point of encouragement, you're a panelist here, and your views presented here and even additional views will be welcome to be added to that think piece. And we do appreciate that offer to discussion in improving our Uganda. Even as you're speaking, I was reminded the Indians, when you watch the Indians, they have their sari, then they have the men's clothing, and down to Africa, I've been with Nigerians, they have their agbadas, their bubas. You watch the Ghanaians, the Malawians. I think it's time really for Uganda to also formulate our.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Santa. We do appreciate. And we are moving on to panelist number 4, Dr. Kamala David. Dr. Edwin Kamala David is a lecturer in the Department of Polymer, Textile and Industrial Engineering at Busitama University, with over 10 years university teaching and research experience. He has authored and co-authored over 20 publications on textiles, clothing, and allied materials and products. Dr. Kamala is passionate about international partnerships and collaborations for academia and the industry, as well as tools for innovation. He is an advocate and promoter of capacity building and value addition initiatives for Uganda's textile and apparel subsector. And he is also a freelance quality inspector and consultant with Puma, Hong Kong, on softline and agro products, a member of the UNBS Technical Committee, TC7, Textiles and related products. He is also in leather and related products, a consultant on the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda. He is as well a consultant on skills development under the PSFU as an individual external evaluator, and is also a part-time lecturer in the chemistry department at Chambogo University. He is the principal investigator for Busitama University seed-funded project called Developing Functional Garments for Children with Locomotor Disabilities. He holds 3 doctorates, PhD in textile engineering from Shusho University, China, chemical engineering, Polytechnic University, Italy, and materials and mechanics from Yale University of Science and Technology, France. His core competencies and interests include fibers and polymers, textiles and apparel markets, quality assurance, functional materials and textiles, anthropometry and sizing catalysis, and catalytic materials, effluent treatment, sustainable production, research, and data analysis. Dr. Edwin Kamala, you are welcome. Speak to the subject at hand.
Thank you so much, Paul. I hope you hear me well.
Yes, you're loud.
Okay. I would like to greet all attendees, the panelists, and I want to really thank you for the opportunity for me to be able to present or be a member of this panel. I also want to thank you for the choice of the panel, because I see is well spread, looking at from fiber to fashion. I see Jolly from Cotton Development Organization, and the other colleagues who are within the value chain of textiles, and also from other support sectors. Without going into what has been said, I also want to appreciate the statistics that have already been presented to us. It shows to us how we have a huge vacuum in this industry. We also have a well-grounded cotton production background, which still has opportunity for growth. I also want to mention that the textile industry is the third largest manufacturing industry in the world, and with lots of opportunities in terms of jobs, in terms of revenue, and also innovation. I would like to thank our colleague Santa for what she has really presented when it comes to fashion, because most times when we talk about fashion, when we talk about textiles, people do look at the narrow part of this industry. It encompasses the whole, including actually the whole textile value chain. So it's not just about clothing or just producing clothing or the styles, but it is really a well-extended industry as well and employing a huge number of personnel. I would like to look also at the opportunities that were presented for the textile industry. Most of you could be aware about the shift in production. You can see that several industries, especially in Europe, in the US, and other developed economies, there's a huge shift that has gradually come to Asia, and now we are also seeing shifts to Africa, especially in countries like Europe, South Africa, and other countries that have been able to take up these opportunities. And I think Uganda as a country with our cotton potential, we have really missed out of this opportunity. The other time we had AGOA, where we thought this was also going to propel and market our potential. Unfortunately, a few value areas in agriculture, in horticulture, and very little for textiles or even crafts do we really exploit this opportunity. Why didn't we exploit this? Santa just mentioned about the big players in this industry. When we got this opportunity, what government probably could have done, we thought maybe they would have looked at all players within this industry. We know that the government, for instance, subsector, is largely employs more of the informal practitioners. Look at Kiembe, look at all these production areas. You cannot easily find a well-organized production within these areas. They are so much into informal production. So there is a huge challenge that if we talk about textiles, we talk about garments, we should also look at the informal producers in this area. How do we mobilize them? How do we organize them, structure them, and be able to offer them the needed support? When we talk about the incentives, I recently saw about the tax cuts, not only recently, but even before. There were some tax cuts, tax exemptions on imported textile equipment. But I thought we should look from the whole value chain, look at from cotton production until we have the garments. How do we also support these people in the informal sector? Why don't we also give tax exemptions, for instance, on sewing machines, embroidery machines, and so much? Because this is where you have your product going to the market. So we should not only look at these big players. Every time I've seen I've seen these companies go to parliament, especially when we used to have only Native and then Phoenix Logistics, which came to be Fine Spinners recently. I see only these big players that come to parliament looking for this support. So the informal sector is very important in this regard. There are still more opportunities when we look at local and regional markets. I have seen African textiles, for instance, African prints. Currently, you will see these prints on the market, but actually they're not being produced only in Uganda. They're being produced actually in China, they're being produced in Asia, and then they come back to us as our local or traditional styles. So there is still a huge gap in several product lines. We need to tap into these areas as well. I still see an opportunity with our textile policy. It is where long since it was enacted. This was 2009. It's now 11 years down the road. I would like to see a review of this policy. How swift, how much of this has been achieved. I thought this needs to also be put across, that this policy needs to be reviewed. The times then were different and the times are now different. The other opportunity, Jolly talked about how much cotton we still need to improve within production, or how much quantity can we actually produce. I think the opportunity is still there. We can still improve this production. When I look at the quantity, the fiber demand, we only have two large, fully vertically integrated textile mills. That is Nitile and Fine Spinners. And I just see that if we doubled, if we tripled, or even increased further, it means with increase in spinning capacity, we shall reach a time when we cannot have enough fiber that these factories need. So we still need to also heighten up our capacity to produce more cotton, looking at other fibers as well. But even as colleagues suggest, looking at other fibers, I think the advantages, the comparative advantages favor us more going or strengthening our cotton capacity compared to going into other fibers. For instance, if we talk about wool, what do we need? Do we have the capacity to really produce wool? What does it take? Do we have the environment? Do we have the land requirements? Do we have the expertise to produce wool as a fiber? It is really a very big question that we need to answer. If we talk about silk, we are actually having a few areas where silk is being piloted. But at a cottage level, if we need to develop a silk industry, what do we need? How many people are really willing to venture into this? Because silk production, for instance, needs or requires huge amounts of land to grow what we call mulberry that you use to feed the silkworms that actually produce these threads. So it is something to really approach cautiously. We can diversify, look at all these fibers. If you look at linen, what are the costs? What are they? What do we need? Yes, the markets are there for all these and these alternative fibers, but they need a great deal of planning and background research about the capacity and what much we really need to do about this. I think it's Chris, in Chris's presentation, Chris talked about leadership. I think this is very important, leadership and extending the mandate of the CDO. And I think this is a suggestion in the right direction. Not just CDO, but I would definitely encourage or love to see a bigger body that is going to be in charge of our textile industry. If you look at countries like India, Pakistan, they have a full ministry of textiles. You see, a full ministry, well funded with several departments and so on. And it doesn't, not only just a simple ministry, cabinet minister with a state minister for different items under this ministry. So I think.
Doctor, we have a bit under 1 minute to go.
Okay, please. I think this is very important as we proceed to discuss. I will bring in a few other areas. I'm going to talk about the skilling. I would like to say that as the university, the Sitema University, Chambogo University, we have pioneered in this training. However, I cannot say that what we are churning out per year, about maybe 30 or between 20 to 30 graduates, that is BSc, Textile Engineering, Textile and Clothing Technology. These are very specialized courses which need or take lots of funding, lots of finances to bring out these graduates. And my appeal is that the industry, government should work with academia to really strengthen this industry in terms of capacity building, in terms of innovativeness, and also developing new products. I thank you so much. We shall be coming back when we have this more time, please.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Indeed, you've touched a number of enlightening areas as well. We are going to move into our poll question, the third poll question, after which I will be calling up our special guests to make their comments, and then we do have the open discussion with the public that includes the public. All right, the third poll question reads, in your opinion, what is the greatest challenge facing the development of clothing and fashion industry in Uganda? In your opinion, what is the greatest challenge facing the development of the clothing and fashion industry in Uganda? First response is competition from foreign brands, then accessibility to second-hand clothes, unlimited coordination between stakeholders, unlimited financing of the sector, poor quality local products. What's your opinion on the greatest challenge facing the development of the clothing and fashion industry in Uganda? First response, competition from foreign brands, availability of second-hand clothes which are more affordable, and limited coordination between stakeholders, limited financing of the sector, or poor quality local products. So we are waiting on you to give your views. We will be having another poll question coming up, but that's a little bit later on. We have about 20 seconds to go on this one. Kindly make your view known on what you think the greatest challenge facing the development of the clothing and fashion industry in Uganda is. Is it competition from foreign brands, accessibility to second-hand clothes, limited coordination between stakeholders, limited financing, or poor quality local products? Kindly make your view known on that particular issue. We are closing this in the next few seconds. And thank you so much for all of you that have participated in this particular poll. We are now ending the poll. Thank you so much. We have had 65% of the webinar attendees responding to this one, and 34% believe it is the accessibility to second-hand clothes, which is the biggest challenge, followed very, very closely with a 32% of limited coordination between stakeholders, and then a 21% of competition from foreign brands, and an 8% of poor quality local products, and then financing of the sector. Clearly, the biggest challenge to the sector is external. It is foreign challenge. And that is something that I think many of the panelists have spoken to in terms of this discussion today. We are now going to move on to have our special guest that will be speaking to us before we move into the public discussion. Jerome Novassa, he is the industrial officer at the Department of Industry responsible for the cotton, textile, and apparel sector in the Ministry of Trade, Cooperatives, and Industry. And he has participated in the development of the East African Community Clothing, Textile, and Apparel Strategy, and is currently coordinating the development of a national clothing, textile, and apparel strategy for Uganda. Kindly welcome Jerome and speak to us about this. And after your conversation, we will move into the general public discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Paul. I really have enjoyed this discussion. The panelists are really well spread, as everybody has been clearly commenting on that. And I really like that it came right from the production to fashion. And I'm particularly glad that we had Santa Hanzo to represent the people from fashion. I also agree with her that the think piece did not capture sufficiently the role of fashion. And it has become our understanding that it is fashion that has been the missing piece in our textile industry. Let me first clarify where I'm from. I'm from the Department of Industry, the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Cooperatives. And it is our role to support, regulate industries so that we can have further industry development. And textile industry is, the cotton, textile, and apparel industry is one of our highest priority industries. Our policy, national textile policy, had some key areas that it had looked at, which I again pointed to in the think piece, like electricity, like financing, and we have done some work in those areas. The government of Uganda has provided subsidized electricity. It has also put in place the buffer stock, which really improves on the financing for raw materials, and it has put in place other tax incentives. But we still haven't seen the change that we expected. And Mr. Bedi talked about how in East Africa we consume about 2 kilograms of clothing every year. Now in Uganda alone, we are about 45 million people. That would mean that we consume about 90 million kilograms of clothing every year. The issue is, how do we first tap this? You see, when you talk about putting all these interventions in place, increasing cotton production and supporting industries to increase production, giving them more affordable electricity, lower taxes. The question is, once they have produced this, apparels and textile fabrics, where are they going to sell them? And this is where fashion comes in, because I know we are saying that we are complaining about second-hand used clothing, but the truth is, if you still take away second-hand used clothing, we are still being out-competed on new clothing. So that gap, if you take away second-hand clothing, it means that that gap will be filled by new clothing from China. You still won't solve the problem. The problem is that we do not have unique fashion for our own people. The problem is that we are not paying attention to what is growing the textile industry out there, because the reason you have Americans consuming a lot of textile is because the fashion industry is driving it in such a way that every season, the old clothes are out of fashion. and you need new clothes. And that's why some of these clothes come and they almost look new because they've only been put on for 2 months, 6 months, 4 months. And it's because they were out of fashion that they came into this country. So the issue that we are having right now is we don't have a very good linkage between our textile industry, the one that is producing the fabrics, and the fashion. So we need to concentrate a little bit more on fashion and make sure that we have more people designing unique fashion. But to be more clear about this, if you consider that if we had a unique fashion, you also would realize that it would be less likely for us to be importing used clothes, because those used clothes would not be in our fashion. They would not be in our unique clothing, our unique fashion. So it is not easy for Saudi Arabia to import used clothes to here, because some of them, most of the people will not be able to buy them because they are not in our fashion. We are simply putting on clothes from Europe and from America, because these are the people that colonized us, and we are still following their fashion. So we really need to work on the identity of our clothing. And once we have that, then we have a control on the industry. I would like to talk a little bit more about what the government is really interested in this industry. We are interested in import substitution. We are very well aware that we are importing a lot of clothing, and we are interested in putting in place measures that will do import substitution. The recent budget got put in place a stay in the common external tariff, where we are going to be charging 35% 35% on a tariff of 35% on clothing and on apparels and fabrics, and $5 per kilogram. Now, one of the biggest issues why this has been designed like this, one of the biggest issues is we have an issue of illicit trade, which was, I also think, missed in the think piece. Illicit trade is a big issue in the whole of East Africa, and the problem is that even if you put in place a common external tariff, or a tariff that is supposed to level the playing field, because this tariff is supposed to make sure that our local industries can compete favorably with the foreign industries. So when you put in place this tariff, you have people circumventing it, under declaring. Someone is bringing in pure cotton clothing, which is heavier, and he's claiming that it is only 30% cotton or something like that. So he then outcompetes fine spinners, which is producing pure cotton, and then you find people saying that t-shirts from fine spinners are too expensive for the local market. So we have put in place this to make sure that every import of clothing is weight, and it is taxed based on weight. That way, even if you claim that it is a different percentage of cotton, the weight is something that you cannot cheat on. So we have put in place that measure mainly to increase import substitution, to make sure that at least our local industries can compete with the foreign industries. But even that in place, if we are not very careful, we can find we are in a place where we are creating a market for the local industry, but the market is not ready to, the industries are not ready to absorb it, because the garment manufacturing within the local industries is not enough to cover the 90 million kilograms of apparels that I was talking of, clothing that I was talking about. You need fashion people to link with the people in Chiembe. So I had someone talking about how Chiembe people are operating in an informal sector. They are doing so because this is the only space that we've left for them. we need fashion people operating with people in GMB. So we need Santa Hanzo to have some garmenters, some of them probably from GMB, who have been trained to produce her kind of clothing, and coordinating with them so that they can produce enough to consume her garment. We need to be in a position where Ugandans are urgently waiting for a new year for Santa Hanzo to release her new design of t-shirt or something, and the same with other fashion houses. The same that is happening in other countries. So this coordination, this linkage is something that is very key, and it is something that we are working on in a new textile strategy that we are working on. The other thing that is very key for government is local resource utilization. We are interested in local resource utilization. What we produce is cotton. We produce a lot of cotton, and we have capacity to produce more cotton. In the think piece, you talked about how cotton can surpass coffee. It's not possible if we don't have value addition in cotton. Coffee fetches a lot of money when sold as a raw crop, as in its raw form and processed. But cotton does not. It needs to be value added. Its key, its value is actually in value addition, and its highest value is in fashion. Because to make a t-shirt, you can find a t-shirt that costs $2 or $3, but once you put H&M on it, the price skyrockets. So you have to really tap that and do value addition to cotton for it to have value. So we need to do local resource utilization, and this is why we are very interested in this industry, because we have a lot of the local resource and want value addition to be done to it. But again, it is fashion that will help us do value addition to cotton, because right now we are suffering. We are getting a lot of man-made fibers, which we're not producing a lot of. So our industries are having to bring in man-made fibers to spin it with cotton. So we would need the fashion people to come up with, because the fashion people can develop fashions that are tailored for certain particular fabrics and make certain fabrics even more attractive. So we need that linkage again to make sure that we concentrate on promotion of local value addition, so that we consume most of our locally produced apparels. The other issue that is very key to government is employment creation. And this is where this industry becomes, again, a little bit more interesting, because unlike most industries where you can set up a production line and the product guy is managing the line, the textile industry, you cannot do that. You must always have people doing the stitching, people doing the cutting, and all different stages of the production. So this is one of the probably the biggest employer if well exploited. So we need a lot of garmenting here. We need a lot of garmenting. I basically mean making shirts, making clothing here, not just making fabrics, but making clothing here. And if we are making clothing here, then we have a lot of our youth employed. The other thing that is very important to government is national security, and it has never been more demonstrated than during these COVID times. During these COVID times, we realized that there can be a scenario where there can be a global pandemic or a global disaster, and we are caught in a situation where we do not have resources and we have to depend on foreign countries to survive. And this is not a good situation for any country to be in. So medical textiles and medical, basically medical textiles, this includes clothing for surgeons, what they use that is protective, basically PPE for medical personnel, needs to also be produced here. Actually, that one doesn't even need to be very profitable. This is important because it is important for national security. We should not find ourselves in a position where we have to depend on a foreign country to be able to fight COVID or to be able to fight any other pandemic that will come. But even on the military side, we should not be buying our military clothing and our military boots and any other textile for military from outside Uganda, because that is already information sharing on what is the capacity of our military. But that also is, saying we are dependent on you to dress our defenders. So this industry is again very important in that area, and that is why a lot of, for example, military clothing, and even right now we are working on trying to make sure the medical textile industry is reserved for local industries, and we are trying to develop local capacity to meet that. Now, I have another key issue that is very important in textile, which is identity. It's very important. Textile has a very important role in culture and identity, and that is why we usually go back to our traditional textiles when we are doing our traditional functions, the kwanjula and all those ones, because it has a role to play in our identity, our culture, and our pride as a people. And that again goes to fashion. And for fashion to design textile and clothing that makes us feel proud as an independent nation and as an independent people. So when you look at all this, first of all, what the government is very interested in, the current strategies that the government has been putting in place, because as per the last policy, the strategies were mainly to support industries produce competitively. But now we realize that we need to also put in place measures that help us secure our local market, because it is after we've secured our local market that our economy will be less vulnerable, because right now we are vulnerable. We are dependent on, you heard from Jas Bedi that because he was dependent on exportation heavily, 80% being exported, if it wasn't for the masks, I believe he would definitely be closing, or he would be really, really struggling. So you're dependent on a foreign economy, which shouldn't be the case. You should be dependent on a local economy, and then you should be earning a little bit more money from the foreign economies, and you should be able to survive with or without the foreign economies. So we are now looking at more using this industry to make our economy more resilient, and we are trying to put in place measures that will enable the industry to secure the local market. And I am very happy with the suggestions that were put in the think piece. I will be very glad to have further interactions, and I really look forward to continuing to work with the Castle think tank, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jerome, indeed, for sharing those views. Now we have gotten to that section where we are addressing issues as have been raised or commented on through our general public space. And we have as well transmitting this webinar onto Facebook, and Santa Atal says that, Stella Atal, our problem isn't second-hand clothes, but rather cheap, poor quality Chinese clothes. Most people in Uganda wear Chinese clothes, hence can't be resold as second-hand. Plus, second-hand clothes are sold, they must be treated. That is Stella Atal giving her view on that. And then Ronald Mwesigwa, he says the opinion poll has given to skilling and textiles at all levels of education. Currently, we have textile training at university level at Chambo and Bositema, as well as several textile vocational institutions. Recently, the presidential initiative for skilling the girl child has been ongoing in textiles and more. Unfortunately, employability of the already qualified personnel leaves a lot to be desired. To date, majority have not been given work opportunities in textile-related organizations, including UNBS, URI, MITC, CDO, recruitment into the educational sector, etc. In addition, the textile business environment for textile professionals in Uganda is difficult to start textile cottage industries. Textile policies are not fully implemented, high taxes, high interest rates, lack of business incentives. Panelists, what is the take of Ugandan government to ensure that textile professionals are fully utilized in both public and private entities in Uganda? I believe those are some of the things that Jerome has been speaking to. Then we have Sarah Sewanyana. Jerome, we need to reorganize the sector with a clear purpose and common goals. But this reorganization should, so there's a lot of comments coming in. Yes, so she has commented about reorganization, and there's a couple of comments as well that have been answered. Keep the comments coming in. The panelists will be looking up for those responses in order to give a response to your questions. Now, I have a couple of questions coming up, and I will be beginning with Jas, because I think, Jas, you spoke first and you have been quiet for a while. And you shared a number of very interesting statistics globally and what we can do. And you said Uganda currently, our raw material export earns us $50 million. But if we only converted that to something like t-shirts, we could earn 12 times or 13 or 14 times more on just that one simple conversion to move us to $750 million. You compare that against coffee, which currently earns us $450 million annually. And you also made a comment that I said we would come back to later, that we shouldn't fight Mivumba, but simply add value. So just how do we bridge that gap? Because $50 million to 750, that is an offer I would like to take up. How do we bridge that gap as Uganda?
Thank you, Paul. I think before I go there, I just want to showcase a 2-minute video, if you allow me to do that, about Uganda's cotton and how we present it to the world. And really speaking, you know, we beat ourselves too much by saying that we don't have the best cotton. Yesterday, I was on a UNDP webinar, and one of the resident managers of UNDP was an Egyptian guy, and very proudly he said in that webinar that, oh, Egypt has the best cotton. I was not short of telling him it is grown using our water from River Nile, which the source is Uganda. So the truth of the matter is, we beat ourselves too much. And with your permission, I'd like to share a 2-minute video on how Fine Spinners is presenting Uganda to the world. So
please go ahead, Jas.
Okay, thank you.
I love to bring something back to humanity. I like to give something back to the environment. And I think with Cotton Made in Africa, that is exactly what I can do and what we can team up to do. I didn't think it was going to be as beautiful, and the people are just so lovely and they have such a joy for life. I think training is very important for farmers so that they are reassured in what they are doing with the right materials, that they're not putting pesticides that is bad for the environment, that they are working as a team and in the best conditions possible. Here we are at the Ginnery. This is the place where the cotton is brought from the farmers, directly from the fields. Then it is processed to separate the seed from the cotton, and then it is packaged to be sent off to all kinds of spinners. I think it's important for people to know that there is a lot of work done behind the t-shirt, even before the thread is pulled, even before the t-shirt is sewn and put together. it's a whole process that we don't necessarily see, and it's been very interesting to learn about it and to see exactly the process from A to Z. Africa has inspired my designs through its beautiful nature, through the colors, through the earth, through wildlife, through the people and their joy for life. I hoped to experience something like this for a long time. My message to furniture consumers is to track where your cotton is coming from, to check the labels, to be sure that it is ethical fashion, that the materials are coming from, like the best example, cotton made in Africa. All consumers need to backtrack and really be sure of what they are spending their money on.
Okay, I think that was a 2-minute. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Just. Go ahead.
That was a 2-minute video showcasing Uganda. The plantations were in Kasese, and all the beautiful cotton growing. I mean, Laura Chaplin is our brand ambassador. She's the granddaughter of Charlie Chaplin, the comedian. And this is what we do in Europe, how we sell our t-shirts, and we show the entire value chain. And when somebody sees that value chain and sees those smallholder farmers, we've also built a school in Kasese, which we donated to the community because, you know, mothers were carrying their little babies and they were going into the cotton fields to pick the cotton. And we said, no, we create a crash for the babies and let the babies go to school because the nearest school was 18 kilometers away. And we've actually got 380 children in the school. 9 classrooms were built for them, which then we donated to the community. So we have a beautiful story here. We have a story from field to fashion, and there's no value chain in the world that can replicate what we have done in Uganda. And that is really what we are trying to sell. We are trying to sell there is a difference, that we have a value proposition. If somebody tells me, what is your USP? What is your unique selling proposition? I said, no, go to China for that because they're good at cheap sell. We are not here to cheap sell. We are here to value sell. And so we have a UVP, which is a unique value proposition. We can tell you which cotton bale was grown by which farmer, and the whole traceability in the entire chain, right up to the time it comes to the factory and it ends up in the store. So we are going in that direction to actually present to the world a value proposition which nobody can replicate. So we have a beautiful product. We have a beautiful cotton that is synonymous to Uganda. And I think it's not so difficult to do that value addition of 15 times the question that you asked me. How do we move the needle from $50 million to $750 million? I think it requires a lot of branding. It requires a lot of value addition, which we can do. We've already started the branding. And of course, we started with a brand called Cotton Made in Africa because by and large, the European customers, you know, especially American customers, they're more ignorant than Europe. They don't even know where Uganda is, right? So when you talk about Africa, then they start understanding that, yeah. So I think we sell the brand as CMIA, Cotton Made in Africa. But right, if you look at the t-shirts that we produce, we write made in Uganda in 17 different languages, including Russian language. So wow. We are, if you go today to Europe, you'll actually start picking t-shirts which are made in Uganda. So it's not impossible to do. We've just started. As the journey continues, we're going to start adding more and more value. We're going through 100% expansion right now. So that means we'll start consuming 20% of Uganda's crop. And I'm encouraging more people to come on board and say, guys, let's do it. We just need to put in the machinery, get in the right capex, and we have the raw material, and slowly we can move up the chain by adding 100% value.
Thank you so much, Jess. It's interesting. Just a quick question. If Ugandans have seen a couple of crops coming up and saying these are needed on the international market, you have opened up a certain niche, which you say you're selling a value proposition to that market space. Should Ugandans jump into producing cotton? Won't you be overwhelmed by the capacity issues?
Well, right now we have no shortage of Ugandan cotton. Like I said, Uganda still exports more than 90% of its cotton. But yes, as more and more factories come on board and more value addition is done domestically, you will start seeing, and I'm very happy Jerome talked about that, you know, if we had some sort of local design or local fashion, which can be worn locally, I mean, the shirt I'm wearing right now, this is made using 100% Ugandan cotton. And this in Kenya has now become a trend. Every Friday, we actually wear made in Kenya clothes designed locally by local fabrics and local, and I think that type of pride needs to be put in. I mean, His Excellency, the President, he wears those white shirts. They are made in fine spinners. He's very proud that he is going to wear local. We need to change the narrative. The narrative in Uganda is imported is better and local is not good. But they forget that Uganda is exporting, and Europeans and Americans are wearing Ugandan clothes, Ugandan t-shirts, for example. So we need to start stop beating ourselves that we can't produce quality and change that narrative into made in Uganda and proudly Ugandan. And that's really what we are trying to do.
Wow, thank you so much. We are continuing with the questions. And Santa, I think I'll come back now to you, because just last comments show that there is a need for Ugandan fashion to begin hitting the deck, not hitting the deck in a negative sense. How do we make this sector work, Santa? You have been thrown a challenge by Jerome that you need to work with the textile sector. How do we make the Ugandan fashion work, and how do we make the Ugandans reach out for it?
Okay, I'm happy, to hear that, especially from Jerome, and I want to thank Jerome so much for a wonderful presentation, because it gave me a lot of hope. I am very hopeful now, and I'm optimistic, and I'm sure by Monday you will have a phone call from Arapapa and Uganda International Fashion Week, because we know that this is what's been missing. As Arapapa, we actually started out with 100% Ugandan made fabric. And at that time, it was the hand woven kikoi. And we watched that die away painfully. And then we jumped onto organic cotton, which was also made here. The old man, Mr. Kashiwada, the Japanese of Phoenix Logistics, I think he finally, left the country and went back, retired back to Japan. We shared a lot about organic cotton. Arapapa sold a lot of organic raw cotton. As you know, but then immediately after, I think the factory was in Tororo, that also shut down. So we were left with nothing. We turned to the manufacturers in Uganda, but the big guys were all looking at exporting to America. And then they were also looking at making, their volumes through bed sheets and things like that. And yet, Jerome rightfully put it, fashion drives the sector. Without fashion, believe you me, we may have the best cotton. And yes, by the way, we have the best cotton. Egypt and Uganda compete, but Egypt is whiter. Uganda has the longest yarn, the most durable. And so we have a beautiful, product here that we are not utilizing. So what should be done? We want to be involved in creating an identity for ourselves through our fabrics. We have brands such as Arapapa, 19-year-old, renowned globally. I can't show you pictures right now, but go on to Google us. You'll find us in the USA, in Paris, in Italy. You'll find us in Thailand, in South Africa. We are celebrated. These are all brands that we can use to push, the cotton and the clothing sector in Uganda. Like my colleague Stella commented, our problem is not secondhand clothing, because actually secondhand clothing can be recycled, and the quality coming from Europe and the USA is very good. So for us, we advocate currently for a harmonious coexistence, because we killed our industries. We can't dress our people. We don't walk around naked. We eat agriculture, number one. We don't walk around naked. We dress up, clothing, number two. It's very important. But here we are, we killed our sector. And so much as we are talking of reviving is not the actual. Reviving is we are beginning to rethink, right? in the meantime, our people need to dress up. So harmonious coexistence with secondhand clothing up to a time when we can actually produce our own. Why secondhand? Because China is cheap and China is hazardous. It's a health hazard. We have seen baby skins peel off. And without going too much into that, I will say that we need to quickly make the linkages between fashion designers and the manufacturers of fabrics and the cotton growers urgent. We need to make that work. And at the same time, those of us that have tried this on our own, you know, since our 20s, you realize that now we've definitely crossed, you know, the big four, and yet we are still struggling with the same issues. Taxation. Taxation is very high. We are producing locally, and yet here we are, made in Uganda, flying the brand all over the world. Taxation is very high. Electricity is a huge challenge. The bills are high, but most of the time there is no power, and yet we have a lot of electricity, you know, produced. So what is it doing? It's being exported to Kenya and Rwanda, whereas we are lacking it. We need enough electricity to run the production lines. Now, another major event, issue that will take us a very long way is realizing that once we tap into our own fabrics, not only the cotton or clothing, but we're talking about leather. Leather is part of clothing, right? We're talking about the Karamojong beads. We're talking about the Nubian, you know, woven products. There is so much in each section of Uganda. Northeastern, we have Karamoja. Northwestern, we have the Nubians. We have the Madi with the beautiful beads. You come down to Buganda, they are weaving. You go down to Ankole, we have the beautiful Ankole, you know, cow horns. We make lovely jewelry out of that. We used Azara Papa to bring in that jewelry for our clients who buy quality, because we don't believe also that Africa is just Jua Kali, that you buy something of $1. We believe that we can add value and, you know, and sell quality. But at this point, we were having to buy these products, to ship these products in from Kenya. They were being made by a German woman there. She used cow horn, she used a cow bone. These are all contacts that we can activate to ensure that, you know, we get crafting. We can make beautiful products with our hands. And that is what is selling globally right now. And it's called eco-sustainable, you know, fashion. Work with what is safe for the environment, work with what actually improves the lives of the people in the community, work with what is actually going to earn us a bit. We are not looking at fast fashion where it's the beneficiary is probably the manufacturer, and that's the ecosystem is huge for fashion. And so support us, give us the necessary tools. Finance is key. I have heard of UDB. The president has been singing about UDB, but I do not know how practical UDB, Uganda Development Bank, is being made for the sector of fashion. We are the Gucci's. I know most of our policymakers, ministers, and all love designer brands, but we are the designers. Your local fashion designers are the Gucci's. We are the Valentinos. We are the Louis Vuittons. We are the ones that drive the clothing industry. And so let us use these brands. Let us ensure that we are not segregated just because we are local. It is thought that, you know, we are not as valuable, which is wrong. So the same support that is given to our colleagues that come into this country to produce should be given to the local, you know, to the local players.
Yes, Santa.
And finally, I will add. Yes.
Sorry, go ahead, wrap it up. I have one more question for you, but just wrap up what you're saying.
Okay, so in conclusion, I will say that Jerome, Ministry of Trade and Industry, we are ready. Those linkages need to be activated now. And like I said earlier, the sector is hungry. We have been left with nothing. And so we are ready to work to make the money that we need and also support the economic development of this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Santa. When you spoke earlier, you spoke of the ready to wear, you spoke a certain French terminology that I don't remember, but meaning ready to wear. Now, that is a huge, yeah, that one. That's a huge niche, and that is the bulk of the used clothing is not coming to the high end. It's coming to the middle class and the lower middle and then the lower class in terms of economic distribution. What's your contribution toward this ready-to-wear space?
In what terms, sorry? As
the fashionistas or the fashion industry in Uganda, we hear a lot about the high end, the Gucci end of things, but how about the ready-to-wear stuff for the middle class, the lower class? What's the contribution that your space can make into that?
Oh no, the contribution is definitely unexploited. It's huge, it's unexploited. Why? Because of, again, the challenges that we are faced with. And one of them being, in this case, majorly, production. I think I've mentioned them again and again, production, finance, it all ties together. For us to be able to produce the numbers and the quality that is needed, it takes a combined effort. And so ready to wear is what I will say you and I wake up to every morning. It's what you wear to the office. Yeah. It's what I wear to my, to my workshop. It's what I wear to the design house. It's what the doctors wear. It's what everybody wears. And so the opportunity is huge. And I know that most of our colleagues, we've discussed about this, and most of our colleagues are actually ready to get into that area, but the challenges still remain. Production. Right now, we are very slow to even say that we need access to market, because it is felt that we are not able to meet the current, available market with demand. And so when that is done, we are able to even, send ready to wear and even, high-end clothing to beyond the borders of Uganda, probably to the ESC markets, and in future, export beyond Africa. And so we just want to start. And so what I guess I need to hear is from the people responsible, the ministries, the UDBs that have actually been told by the president to support this sector. What we need to hear is when are we getting the support we need? Because we are set, we are ready to go. Yes.
That's great to hear, and I'm sure, Jerome, the challenge is back in your court. Santa has promised that your phone will be ringing off the hook. Now, Commander Obed made a comment here. We need government commitment and support for local producers. Otherwise, international competition limits local growth. And we'll be coming back to that comment. And Jolie, specifically to you, I will request that you will speak to that. And more so, what must government invest in order to support the cotton industry, and as well help that industry to produce competitive products? What is the practical things that we need for government to move on now? But I'll give you a minute to think about that, because I'd like us to have our last poll question for today, and then we will come back to that question for Jolie to respond to. Let's have our fourth poll question for today. And the question reads, has the government done enough to facilitate the development of the clothing and fashion industry The answers are three: simply yes, I don't know. Has the government done enough to facilitate the development of the clothing and fashion industry? And your response is either a yes, a no, or I don't know. So we are waiting to hear, and indeed the poll question speaks to the space in which we will be hearing from Jolly shortly on what can be done to begin with to boost the cotton industry. What are the key priorities that need to be pushed in that space? We've heard from Jas that the value addition feeds off quality product and in turn is able to deliver the value. Thank you so much for those that have participated. We'll end the poll in the next 10 seconds. Has the government done enough to facilitate development of the clothing and fashion industry? Yes, no, or I don't know. Thank you so much for everyone that has participated in the poll. We are now ending the poll, and the results of this are that 77% of participants think the government hasn't done enough to facilitate the developing of the clothing and fashion industry. And 19% don't know, and a paltry 3% think the government has done enough. So clearly this is actually one of the biggest variants of a poll that we have had here on our Castle Think Tank surveys. So it is actually a critical and important thing for the government to think about and to respond to. Jolly, we are coming back to you now. I don't know if you can hear us, if you can activate your microphone and speak to those concerns. The initial concern was in a comment by Kabanda Obed. We need government commitment and support for local producers, otherwise international competition limits local growth. And then sequel to that, I asked a question, what must government do in terms of priorities to support the cotton industry in order to produce competitive products? And what are the practical things that need to be done? Jolly.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Thank you, and to all the participants and the panelists. For the question about what government is doing to absorb whoever has been skilled and everything, I actually did send a comment and said, if CDO can be approached, then we shall approach whoever has those skills and has been trained so that we can try to talk to the relevant manufacturers or entities that can absorb these people that have skills. So far, I don't think that there has been a direct link, but I did say, I did comment, I did answer. I think whenever we are approached, and that is some of the things that we do, but we do it as a promotion and coordination as our mandate. We try, for example, when Texida needed yarn, I think we went to fine spinners and negotiated with them. So I encourage whoever has those skills, wherever they have, to approach CDO. We shall knock on the doors that are relevant. On the question that you've asked, Paul, and I think for that question that I've just answered, I want to actually thank Jerome. I think he did a lot of eye-opening and information giving, which has hitherto maybe not been so widely known by those that need it. So thank you so much, Jerome. And I hope that we can work together with CDO. We've always worked together with the Ministry of Trade, but I think this is a new drive in the right way. So we should work together so that this information can actually go as wide as it needs to go for the local content and import substitution drive. Now, what should government do to support the cotton industry? I did say, and here I want to actually apologize to Santa. It's not that I don't support fashion or we don't think about fashion, but I did say cotton production has reached 250,000 bales and has stagnated there and sometimes even gone below. The driving force for productivity for the farmer is a very good business person. They are going to decide which crop to plant according to the price. Now, cotton is a seasonal crop. It competes with anything, beans, maize, soybean. So if the soybean or sesame price is up, the farmer is the same. It is a small scale farmer. We don't have large scale farmers. They are going to go where the prices are going to fill their pocket. How do you stabilize the cotton price? I cannot say that government should put a stabilization fund, but right now under COVID, I think that's what government should do in times of need, of emergencies like this, like when cotton prices collapsed in 2009, government came in and gave a buffer to private sector and the prices were stabilized. But that is a once in a while, maybe every 5, every 10 years. But for now, what government needs to really push and invest in, we've talked about this for the last so many years. We've discussed it with whoever has engaged us. We need value addition. China, India did not develop their cotton industries by exporting the raw lint. You cannot stabilize the prices. Government cannot give stabilization funds. They have limited funds and they have a lot of other things that are really require the funding. But if these funds in UDB and anywhere else can be put together and we attract value addition in all the products of cotton. I did talk about seed, which is not a discussion for today, but if we are talking about animal feeding, we need to develop also the animal feeds. If we are talking about the leather, I think we need the animals. But coming back to the clothing, yes, I had your question to Santa was how are they strategizing? How are they positioning themselves for the lowest of the lowest, especially in clothing? Because that is what the bigger picture should be. The higher end, those are the few, maybe some of us and you also listening and those who are higher. But then how about the person that is in the village, that uniform? And that is why I talked about, let's start with the easy to make fabric and garments and home textiles. Because if we do that, then it will have a multiplier effect. And I'm sure when all the cotton is being converted, you can mix it with the other man-made fibers, those can be imported, but you are going to create employment at all levels, not just in Kampala, not only in urban areas. I did say these can even be cottage industries, way down into the villages. The school uniforms can be made by that tailor who is just in his house. So to me, that's why I insist that having seen what the Asian countries have done, how they've developed their textile and garment sectors, we start with the easy to make, as the fashion industry also is helped financially and all the other issues they talk about, electricity, water, taxes, all that I think is being addressed and can be addressed. But we need the bigger picture of investing in value addition, and that is spinning. And then also the cotton seed oil. Because if you only do spinning of the lint, then where does the seed go? If the production increases, we also have to address the seed side. But for the lint, if we could add value to the 200,000 bales, the price will stabilize. How does it stabilize? The 4 cents that is spent in transporting this lint will be plowed back into the price. There is a formula that we use, and you'll find that about $1 is going back to the farmers. That is what India does, and that is how they stabilize the farmers' price, and that is why they are now the largest cotton producer in the world. So I think government should really look into what needs to be done to increase capacity for value addition. I did say we can start with The two that we have, Mr. Bedi has talked about it. We have Southern Range, Nyanza, Native. We have fine spinners. We can engage them. They are taking about 20,000 bales or over plus minus. How can they actually add value to maybe 100,000 bales? If they add 100,000 bales, who will be the off-takers of the fabric? That is what Santa was saying. So the fabric will be available. It can be knitted for the t-shirt, it can be woven, it can be blended, but at least we need the fabric so that we can make the garments here. The garment industry will develop. That is now my other input that you've asked. We need skilling. We need to train, not just the Jambogos and Busitema. We need, short courses for tailoring, for garmenting, because how the locally made garments are not attractive is because of the standards. How even the seam makes a lot of difference. So we need to have those as we go forward as a country to skilling and retooling Ugandans. That should actually, it can start in school. We used to have it in school. So we need to have these colleges, these tertiary institutions to do that. All these Asian countries have those. Even people who can't speak English, they are taught in their local languages. So that when the fabric is made, then you have off-takers. And I agree with Santa, it will be much cheaper than the imported, but that is if the taxation and the Bubu policy is well implemented. Yeah. I think, to me, the last one, but which can also be looked at even as the first one, is research. Cotton is a crop, and you need to improve your seed all the time, all the time. Yes, we have the research stations, but I know that they are not that well funded. So as we go forward, for any crop, I think you need to be funding research continually and in giving them enough money. So if we addressed research, we addressed value addition, we addressed skilling, we would create so many industries and cottage industries. We would create employment and we would create import substitution. But that is if the Bubu Buy Uganda, Build Uganda policy is implemented to the letter, and these factories or small scale industries are well protected. Then the bigger issue of electricity and all the other taxation issues, I think that is being addressed, and it can even be improved if it is not satisfactory. That is what I can say.
Thank you, Julie. And before I actually move on to another panelist, just two things that keep lingering in my mind, to which maybe you could briefly comment. Does government have a role in sourcing markets outside our borders? And growing up, I saw a lot of cooperatives, which unfortunately seem to have disappeared off the scene. In this equation of this, following this cotton money, the $50 million to $750 million, what do those two elements, what role do they have to play? And how can we realize that role? The two elements being sourcing for external markets and resuscitation of cooperatives, because Uganda's agriculture, 80% is smallholder. And for you to gain value for the smallholder, one of the best ways to approach is cooperatives. Kindly speak to those briefly.
Well, for the cooperatives, I think I'll throw it back to Jerome, if he's still available, because that is the mandate of Ministry of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives. So I really, I don't have much, I cannot comment ably about that. But if Jerome can chip in, I think he can. I'm sure he has some information. But I agree with you. For us, what we have actually done with cooperatives not quite coming back on board, we have tried to organize farmers in groups because they are better served in groups and they are better marketing in groups. What was the other one? I didn't write it.
The other one was the role in terms of sourcing for external market.
Okay. Now, I think our president has always talked about anything that we want him to do, he will do. So I think at the highest level of government, I think it can be done. We have Ministry of Trade, we have export promotion. We may not know exactly how everybody does what they do, but I think government will do that as long as the products are available. However, I see that the private sector really tries very hard, as Mr. Bedi was saying, and I know that even NITIL does their marketing within the region and across very well. But the bigger problem for the markets to me is for as long as you have cheap imports coming in, any investor is going to be very shy, because if their production costs are higher than what we are importing, either because taxes are evaded by whoever is importing, then they are the ones who are going to be even shy not to produce as much as we want them to produce. So we need to protect them. Young industries must be protected. I think even at WTO, that is recognized. So with COVID, as I said, I think it has ushered in a need and a justification for protecting your own industry so that they can develop. Once we have a good product, once we have a competitive product at whatever level, I think markets can be found, and we have enough human resource and commitment within government, even right from the top, that this can be done. For now, I think we don't have what to sell, and that's why the drive has not been there.
Thank you so much, Jolie. Jerome, can you briefly comment on the cooperatives issue? Kindly, briefly. Jerome, are you still with us?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, Jerome. Briefly comment on the cooperatives question that I asked.
Yes. So, like as it has been clearly demonstrated, a lot of our cotton production is by smallholder farmers, and you need to aggregate them in order to be able to provide them with support services like extension services, and you can only do this if you aggregate them. Cooperatives are the best way of aggregating these smallholder farmers. The cooperative department at the Ministry of Trade is doing a very wonderful job. In fact, one of the best cooperatives we have is the Nyakatonzi Cooperative, which is a cotton producing cooperative. And we are trying to expand this to have many more farmers see this. But the thing about cooperatives is if you cooperate, because you normally cooperate around a common cause. So if you're a cotton production cooperative, you need to be seeing profits in that. You don't want to have members who today were growing cotton and tomorrow are growing a different crop. So it has a lot to do with the profitability of what you're cooperating around. So once I have no doubt that the government of Uganda has sufficient capacity and has to support cooperatives and to enable corporate development. The issue is what these farmers cooperate around. If it creates profit, then you'll have a successful cooperative. If it doesn't, if the cotton industry itself is not profitable, then it's not an issue of being able to support cooperative development. It's an issue of what they are cooperating around. So there is sufficient capacity to support cooperatives, without a doubt. And they can, and the government is even taking further steps to sensitize people about this, but any members that are interested can gladly, ably approach the ministry and get the support that they need.
Thank you so much, Jerome. It's indeed encouraging to know that we are back on track with those cooperatives. Now coming to Edwin. Edwin, you spoke quite well around the issue of production. And could you speak to how do we produce clothes in Uganda cheaply enough? And I'm talking about supporting, we've thrown the challenge to the fashion industry. On this other hand, we do have the industry that is producing the spinners. How do we produce clothing cheaply enough for the domestic market? You know, because we apparently have a problem that is being filled in or plugged in by the used clothes and the Chinese. So how, in your view, do we remedy this? Edwin? Edwin, can you hear us?
Yes, Paul, thank you so much again.
Go ahead, Edwin, we can
Yes,
hear
thank
you.
you so much. My colleagues, you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, yes, I said my colleagues have talked about most of the challenges, and these really go into most of the logistical issues, the utilities, the raw materials, and so on, to be able to produce competitively and be able to also sustain the competition against the second-hand clothing and also the other imported clothing. I would want to say first, even if we banned second-hand clothing today, the prices of our locally produced clothing are still either going to remain either the same or still will go high, because first we cannot fulfill the demand that we need, the demand that we have locally. If you look at what our factories are producing here, they are mostly producing home textiles. They are producing institutional clothing like uniforms you talked about, beddings, and all these categories. So there is still a big problem when you go to the everyday wear, the personal wear. That is going to be a huge challenge to fulfill. So unless we have uh, tax cuts or exemptions, subsidies, which have been discussed widely, unless we have the utilities, the prices regulated, or a certain level of pricing adopted for categories of certain manufacturers, unless we have water issues, the prices still will be high. If you look at textile manufacturing, we consume a lot of water, especially when we go to the processing areas. So unless these input costs are considerably reduced, we will still get products that are going to cost a lot, products that will not be manageable. The largest proportion of our consumers of clothing are actually people who have very low purchasing power, people in the villages, people who live at a very low per unit or per capita. So we need to look mostly at the input costs. We have cotton, which is okay, but we do not have other materials. You cannot produce only 100% cotton. We need diverse products for different applications. We talked about silk, for instance. We cannot produce enough silk. We cannot produce even wool. We can't produce any other fiber generally apart from cotton. So we shall still keep importing these other materials as long as the costs of producing them here are still high. One suggestion I had here was about a deliberate fund that could be used to really uplift the sector, a deliberate textile fund. You know, when they give money to UDC or UDB, this is for development for entrepreneurs. So it means someone who is into tourism, someone who is into agriculture, someone in manufacturing, all these will be competing for this little fund. So I think a deliberate effort to really create such a fund should be put in place. The other issue is also about the skilling, because most of the graduates that we produce, not only from our university, but also from other universities from different fields. You well know that most graduates will still be trained when they reach or when they are taken on the job. So these factories also still spend much on reskilling. So I think producers should also partner with us as trainers. They should partner with us, develop curricula that really meet the demands of their production in some of these short courses, like Jolly said. We can work with them, develop and implement training and reskilling programs on their behalf, bring their people, we train them, those who are already employed with them, and also even our graduates, before they take them on, we can really work with them on such programs.
Yes. Yes.
In the think piece, I saw something to do with industrial parks, and I really commend this, that specific industrial parks for textile production would really boost this growth. So they would also save costs, because investment doesn't only look at the machinery, but also the land, the infrastructure. So if we have these parks that are well developed with all this infrastructure targeted towards textile production, I think this would also aid and give us a good grounding.
Thank you so much, Dr. Edwin. Unfortunately, we have actually run out of time for this webinar. I do appreciate your input and everyone that we've had on the webinar today. Next week's webinar will speak to think tanks. I'm sure for those who have been following the last 10 webinars, you have seen the value of thinking and strategic thinking. So we would like to speak to the issue of think tanks and how do we promote these in our environment in Uganda. I'm yet to see an economy that has grown globally that has not had thinkers behind it. So kindly prepare for the webinar on think tanks. And we would also want to appreciate as CASO all our panelists today. We do appreciate Mr. Jerome Novassa, who has represented the government space on this and as our chief guest. We also thank Mrs. Jole Sabune, MD Cotton Development Organization, Mr. Jas Bedi, the ED Fine Spinners Uganda, Ms. Santa Hanzo, MD Arapapa Fashion House, as well as Dr. Edwin Kamala. We do appreciate your time and your value add to this discussion today. And my name is Bukenya Paul Michael. I've been your moderator today. I want to welcome Mr. Ernest Katwesije from the board of CASO Think Tank to close this discussion and to give a closing prayer. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Paul. I hope I'm loud and clear.
Yes, you're loud.
Thank you very good. Thank you very much, Paul, for a wonderful discussion. On behalf of the board of CASO, I would like to appreciate all our panelists. Thank you very much. Very much that this has been a very enriching discussion. Many things that we either previously took had not even, and definitely we need to do much more to harness the opportunities in this sector, especially in areas of value addition, areas of quality training, areas of R&D, and working on our environment to boost our local industry. We believe as CASO that the policymakers are listening and that action will be taken. We as CASO can commit that we have listened to the recommendations, the suggestions, and we shall update our think piece and come up with solid policy recommendations to government. We'd like to appreciate all the participants for the active engagement in the Q&A and in the discussion. This has been tremendous. I would like to appreciate the other board members, Dr. James Magara, our chairperson, Honorable Benson Obua, Ms. Christina Lupo, Mr. Robert Mutiaba, Kathy Mumza, our COO. Mr. Paul Bukenya, I shouldn't forget you. We appreciate the board for this initiative and the other initiatives. Once again, thank you very much for joining us and I encourage us to participate even in the upcoming webinars. Next week especially is a very critical one. I encourage each and every one of us to participate in it. Let us pray as we close. Heavenly Father, in the name of Christ Jesus, we thank you once again for this opportunity to engage together as we build our country. We thank you, God, for this rare opportunity presented by COVID to reflect on many aspects that relate to our country. We thank you, God, especially for the clothing and the fashion industry. And we thank you for the opportunities that are in. We thank you for the steps that the government is taking to harness these opportunities. We thank you for the private sector and the role that they are playing in this. We pray, God, in the name of Christ Jesus, that you will give us the courage to implement what we need to implement, that your name shall be glorified. We thank you, God, in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thank you so much. Till we meet again next Saturday.
Amen. Thank you.
Chris. Hello. Chris, can I get Jerome's contact? Someone was asking for Jerome's contact.